Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. I was recently asked, how do we determine what to talk about on the podcast? And the truth is, many of our topics for the podcast come from parents and individuals who provide services to children, adolescents, and young adults. And today we're talking about a topic that has come up for parents, for providers, and young people who are managing dual and sometimes multiple identities. We're talking about the overlap between autism spectrum disorder and identifying as LGBTQIA+. And how can we better understand and support multi-minority status individuals? My guest today is Dr. Laurie Stephens. Dr. Stephens is a developmental psychologist who currently serves as the Senior Director of Autism and Clinical Programs for the Help Group. Dr. Stephens has been passionate about finding innovative and effective ways to support autistic children, teens, young adults, and their families and communities since 1990. During her time doing this work, she has developed an interest in the overlap between gender identity and autism spectrum disorder. She actually noted that many of her autistic clients were coming out as transgender, gender fluid, and non-binary, and she wanted to find ways to help them accept their authentic selves and also find an affirming community. She helped the Help Group, one of our Child Nexus member schools, develop Kaleidoscope, the first of its kind LGBTQ+ program for children, teens, and adults who are neurodivergent. Now, Dr. Stephens has said in other talks that she has given, and I agree with her, that words and phrases have impact. And as clinicians and human beings, it's important to be mindful of the language we use. And so before we even begin this discussion, I want to recognize the fact that language changes. There's no universal agreement on some terms used. But for the topic of the conversation today, it's important for me to say that the majority of the autistic community prefer identity first language. So autistic person rather than person with autism. So we are going to do our best to use that language. We want to emphasize that neither of us intends harm or degradation in the phrases we use. And again, we want to jump into this very important conversation. You've heard enough from me. Let's jump into the conversation with Dr. Stephens.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hello, Dr. Stephens. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so delighted that you are here. I have really enjoyed collaborating with the Help Group over this past year. I did one of your webcasts, one of the Help Group webcasts about neuropsychological assessments with Jason Bolton last year, and I've been eager to have you on the podcast ever since. And so I'm thrilled that we were able to work this out.
Me too.
Now, today I wanted to have you on because I want to talk about autism, gender identity, because they both shape kind of our concept and constructions about identity. And there's a lot to be discussed. I've been having a number of discussions with other psychologists and neuropsychologists, and many have been reporting seeing a trend. Autistic young people who identify as LGBTQIA+. And it sounds like you are seeing the same.
Absolutely. We have started a whole program called Kaleidoscope that's really specifically designed to try and provide a safe space and an affirmative space for the autistic LGBTQIA person.
And this is something that parents are questioning and asking questions about because they are seeing this themselves. And what I shared with a family recently is that new research actually suggests that autistic people are more likely than neurotypical people to be gender diverse. And gender diverse people are more likely to have autism than are cisgender people. And they were actually surprised to hear that there was research in this area.
Yeah, it's a relatively new field, and we need lots more research. But
We do.
all of the research has been pointing to about a 25% increase when you look at autistic people who identify as gender diverse. And then conversely, when you assess for autism or ask about self-identified autism within the gender diverse population, it's not as common, let's say, within the gay or lesbian population, but within that gender diverse group, it's significantly more common. And there's a significant intersection that I think all parents, teachers, clinicians need to be aware of. Because if you serve one portion of the population, so if you, let's say, are a therapist for the LGBTQIA community, it's imperative that you understand that your clients might also be autistic. And alternately, if your practice is primarily with autism, then you really want to be sure that you are aware of the gender diverse piece and how to provide affirming support and affirming psychology to that population.
And that's specifically why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because of that overlap, the intersection between autism and LGBTQIA+.
Right.
And there's significant overlap is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And we always have to keep in mind, whenever we're looking at the LGBTQIA community, we have to keep in mind that it's most likely underreported, right? Because there's still stigma, unfortunately, associated with identifying as LGBTQIA. And so the numbers of true intersection are going to be higher. The one thing that we do think might be true is that because a lot of autistic people are really seeking authenticity and don't believe in hiding who they are, that perhaps they are a little bit more likely to say, yes, I am gender diverse, and to go out in public presenting that way than the non-autistic population. But that's a theory. There's no clear research that states that that's part of why we're seeing this high intersection.
Yes. And, when we talk about the high intersection, I think you may have actually reported in another conversation that you've had that 70% of autistic individuals identify as non-heterosexual, and about a quarter or 22% of autistic individuals identify as LGBTQIA+.
Primarily gender diverse. So there's a very high percentage within, when you ask through surveys, you ask identified autistic people if they identify as LGBTQ, it is about a 70% yes rate. But when we narrow that down more specifically to how are they identifying, the largest group is the gender diverse. So that can be gender fluid. So feeling like you can be a man some days and a female some days. It can be non-binary, where you're presenting as neither male nor female. Neither one of those identities fits with you. And it can be transgender, which is where you identify with a gender that was not the one assigned to you at birth.
And when you're talking about understanding the overlap, I think you said we have theories, and people might be thinking that autistic people may not be as influenced by cultural norms, social norms. Does that contribute to the overlap? And if so, how?
I think it does, because I think that binary system of thinking about gender, you're either male or female, and that is determined by anatomy more so than anything else. When you're not as kind of driven by societal norms and societal expectations, then you're much more likely to present as who you are. And we could definitely think about the fact that these gender roles and the sort of binary thoughts, it might not really hold up if there wasn't the stigma of, well, but this is how women are supposed to be, and you need to act like a woman. Or, oh, a man doesn't cry. You can't be a real man if you do that. The whole idea that boys need to wear blue and girls need to wear dresses, there's no evolutionary reason for this. And if we actually think about it, which I think is fascinating, is if we look at like gender roles early on, it was the men who wore makeup. It was the men who had fancy hair. It was the men who wore high heels. It was the men who wore flowered outfits. And that's changed. But that's changed because of society, not because it's needed in terms of evolution, or it's not because it has any life-sustaining properties. So if you don't believe in abstract ideas like that, which a lot of autistic people don't, and a lot of autistic people just within their autism now are fighting for authenticity. This is who I am. Stop telling me I need to be neurotypical. I'm not neurotypical, and I'm okay not being neurotypical. And so the more they're advocating for being who they are as an autistic person and wanting society to accept them as an autistic person, the more freedom they have to also be like, hey, wait, I'm also gender diverse, and you need to accept this aspect of me too.
And that authenticity is such a critical piece of this as well.
Yes.
And so when we're looking at these young people, they essentially have kind of this double minority status. You know, they're neurodiverse and they're gender diverse. How does that double minority status impact young people? Because we know that there's higher levels of anxiety and even some depression and mental health challenges in individuals who are not fully understanding who they are, who are struggling socially, who may feel isolated. Can you talk a little bit about its impact on young people?
Right. And I always like to point out that, so you've got the dual minority status because you are neurodiverse or autistic, and you're also LGBTQ, you are gender diverse. But then we also have other cultural aspects. So you might also be Asian, you might also be African American. And so this population oftentimes is multiple minority status. And we know just looking at the dual status of being, let's say, gender diverse and autistic, that kind of each one of those in and of themselves have really similar masking, right? So autistic people for decades have thought, I have to mask, I have to pretend to be neurotypical, I can't let people see that I engage in stimulatory behaviors, I have to do this on my own, I have to pretend to be social. And the gender diverse population has masked. I can't wear a dress in public. I can't wear nail polish at work. So there's a lot of overlap, but it also is compounded by the dual minority and multiple minority statuses. So it's more impactful than each one of the individual minority identities, if that makes sense. It's like it has an exponential effect. And that's also what drives the high mental health difficulties, which we know are found in both the gender diverse and the autistic population, which are, as you said, anxiety, depression, eating disorders above and beyond just ARFID, the restricted eating, self-abuse, self-injury, suicidality. All of those are very common within the autistic population, the LGBTQ and gender diverse population. And then when you add those two minority statuses together, again, you get an even higher rate. And that's why most of these people are seeking out therapy. They're not seeking out therapy because they're autistic. They're seeking out therapy because they're depressed, because they have anxiety, because they're feeling like they can't cope with the world, and the world doesn't understand them and never will, or the world will never accept them. And so that's why they seek out mental health services.
And that's why it's so important for others around them to understand their experience and be more affirming and be more accepting, because it seems that they're pushing back and fighting against the stigma that they're experiencing. They're camouflaging, which is exhausting, and they just want to be accepted and understood in this world.
Absolutely. And there's the other thing that goes on is there's a lot of myths about autistic people, particularly, they couldn't possibly know what gender is. So they're just, they don't know what they're talking about, which absolutely is not true. Or that they're not interested in relationships, whether that's a sexual relationship or whether that's just a high level romantic relationship. They are, and autistic people get married and have children and have partners, and so we need to break away from that stereotype too, because we're kind of saying, oh, it's not real because they're autistic, where there's no data to support that.
Right. And that's also why we need that firsthand experience of autistic individuals to kind of inform us about what it is that they're experiencing and the challenges that they are facing from these multiple identities.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest, I've been working with autistic people for about 30 years, just to age myself. And I've never learned more. I could read textbooks and do all of this. I never learned more than I learned directly from my clients or from going to hear autistic people speak. And what's been fantastic with the emergence of social media is that it has actually given a really good platform to many autistic advocates. So people who have lived experience as autistic, have lived experience as a gender diverse person, and are able to really say, hey, this is what we need. This is what's happening to us, and this is how you can help. Because it's like that social model of disability as opposed to the medical model. Society is going to have to change and accept them, not the other way around. They don't need to fit in with our really narrow view of what people are supposed to be like. We need to expand. Society needs to expand our view and understand that everybody is a worthwhile human being and everybody has value. And we also oftentimes talk about neurodiversity is needed the same way as biodiversity is needed. And very few people would argue that, oh, no, we don't need biodiversity. We don't need all of these animals, and we don't need all of these different climates and everything. Of course we do. And neurodiversity is the same thing. We need all of these different thinkers because that's how we make progress. That's how new inventions come about. And so we need neurodiversity. And it doesn't make any sense to want everybody to think the same. How would we ever grow and change? And how would new things develop if everybody thought the same and acted the same?
Absolutely. And this is where educating parents and teachers and communities about autism, about the overlap, the intersection between autism and gender diversity is so important. And I'm thinking about the individuals that I'm seeing come into my practice and what my colleagues are reporting. And they're reporting people coming in to get identified or requesting an assessment for autism later in life. And a lot of them have been identified as LGBTQIA plus first, and then autism identification and diagnosis comes later. Have you seen that as well in terms of the timing of getting an autism diagnosis?
Absolutely. So we see that in our clinic too, that we have a lot of gender diverse, mostly transgender or non-binary presenting folk who are coming in to get an autistic diagnosis. And these are people who have there's a couple of things that happen, right? When you're gender diverse, and maybe you're experiencing some gender dysphoria as you're growing up, I think even for parents, the idea of, oh, and my child has something on top of that becomes an overwhelming idea. So the autism, because it's not your kind of high needs autism per se, that a lot of folk are presenting with, it gets swept under. And then we also know that females, whether you are assigned female at birth or not, females tend to be underdiagnosed. And most people sort of ignore the autistic presentation in females. And I was just reading something the other day that still said autism is 4 times more common in males than females. And it's like, no, autism is diagnosed 4 times more often, but that's because people don't really understand how to diagnose in females, especially adult females. They're not positive. What are they supposed to be looking for? So we have this is a whole new diagnostic field, but definitely the autism diagnosis is coming later in the gender diverse population.
And what we're seeing too is that the result of, again, that not being understood and having like a missing piece, something is just not understood, can contribute to those mental health challenges that we talked about earlier, the anxiety, the depression, self-concept issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, they do. And this is the problem. I mean, again, if we're just talking about autism or we're just talking about gender diversity, you could see how difficult it is because both of these populations have been told, well, actually, you're bad and wrong, and you're acting in ways that are unacceptable, and you need to start to act more like the norm or the expected. So again, both these populations have been told that, but yet they are who they are. You can't just change who you are. And we've been undervaluing, devaluing, and stigmatizing both of these groups. And then think about how much that compounds the stigma that we've been putting on the autistic gender diverse person.
Right.
And that's why I think it's so important that mental health providers really become aware of this overlap so that they're able to address both issues and that they're well trained in affirming psychology. I think mental health, I'm giving a talk on this next month too, that, mental health provision for the autistic person, it is not about treating the autism. And that's how I feel very strongly about that. I know that there are people that might have a different point of view, but I feel very strongly that it's about what are those comorbid features, the anxiety, the depression, the suicidality, maybe the drug misuse that needs to be addressed. But I don't need to make somebody not autistic. And I don't need to make somebody gender conforming either, ever.
Right. It's not about making someone act in a way that makes other people more comfortable, right?
Correct.
Right. So it seems that providing affirming support, modeling affirming practices is really key. How do parents do that? Because oftentimes parents say, I don't know how to support my child. How do you guide them?
So oftentimes when a parent has come and said, I don't know how to support them, our first statement is, but actually you're taking the first step. This is an affirming step to seek out help, to let your child know, I don't know how to help you, so I'm going to get help myself. That's letting the child know or the young adult know, you know what, I want to know how to affirm and accept. So, and then we just talk about being there to listen, being there to say, it's okay. We accept who you are and not, I will love you no matter what, or something like that, which kind of implies, well, I don't like it, but I still love you. So getting that kind of language out of their vocabulary and just saying, I love you. I accept who you are. What can I do? So a lot of that has to do with understanding why pronouns are so important to this population, utilizing the right pronouns, asking the child or the young adult how, what is the boundaries for which they want you to disclose who they truly are. And really being able to just affirm you are a valid person, you are a good person. Maybe you go to a pride march with them. Maybe you go to some LGBTQIA cinema with them. You watch a show that has an LGBTQ character, and you just start to show that you support. It doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means that you accept and that you're okay with this person being who they are because that's who they are.
Right. And you're willing to learn. You're listening and you're willing to learn.
Absolutely.
And it's also important for gender diverse autistic youth to find others that they can connect with socially in a safe and affirming environment. Tell us about your Kaleidoscope program, because I think it's just brilliant.
Thank you. So Kaleidoscope really started out of the fact that as a clinician who focuses on autism, so many of my clients were coming out as gender diverse, mostly transgender, but within the entire realm of gender diverse. And I thought, this just seems like it's a very high percentage based on what I would expect from the general population, as we call it. So I started to do some research, and there was very limited research, and there was certainly no supports. There were people who really didn't understand the intersection at all. And at the same time, we noticed in our schools for autistic individuals that more and more were asking for GSAs. So, the gender and sexual identity groups, they were coming out with their teachers, with their classmates, and as everything as LGBTQ. And we thought, okay, there's something here. We need to be providing supports. So Kaleidoscope provides mental health services with highly trained mental health providers who understand both the autism piece and the LGBTQIA piece. And we have a specialized diagnostic clinic that's primarily, again, for gender diverse folk who think that they might have autism. And then we provide all types of social supports and activities. So for children as young as, let's say, 10 years of age. But if we had a younger group, we would be happy to put together a younger group where it's an autistic LGBTQIA group of people coming together, and really, whether it's watching movies, we'll have movie night, we have game night, we go bowling, we do everything, but it's just with other people who are just like you. And what most of the kids and young adults will say is, this is the first time I've met other people that are just like me. And that's really what they're looking for. They're amazing at exchanging their social media handles instantly. And then even when they're not within Kaleidoscope, they're still able to reach out to each other. And we all know that this population needs a lifeline, just that one person. So the Trevor Project has really wonderful data that shows that just one affirming person in your life can reduce suicidality by about 60%. So once you know, hey, wait a minute, I met 3 other kids my age who are going through just what I'm going through. I can reach out to them, and together we can figure out how to be resilient and stick around and change it for the younger kids. And we're also encouraging advocacy all the time. And we're encouraging and letting this population know right now, you are at the forefront. You are the stonewall of your generation. Let's make the change and make it safe for the kids coming up, the next generation of kids. And then it empowers them. And there's nothing like feeling empowered.
That is so wonderful. You're getting activities, based on their interests. You're connecting them with other people who are like them. They're getting mental health support and social support. Now, the help group is based in Southern California. If there are gender diverse autistic youth who live outside of California, can they access any of these programs remotely?
Yeah, the only thing they can't access, unfortunately, is the mental health services, but they can contact us and we can work on finding somebody in their area that might be able to see them. But that's just because of licensing laws. However, all of our social services and our advocacy programs are also offered online. So you can come in person, but the same thing is also offered online. So we have people that come from Barbados and many other countries, even where it's not safe for them to be out, but they can come and join a Kaleidoscope group, and they can just be who they are. So yes, they are available to people outside of the Los Angeles area.
Wonderful, Dr. Stephens. Thank you so much for being here with me today and for all that you do to support neurodivergent and neurotypical LGBTQI+ in questioning youth, young adults, and their families. This conversation is going to help so many families, so many individuals in our community. Where can listeners go to learn more about the Kaleidoscope program and the work that you all do at the help group?
So they can go to Kaleidoscope, lgbtq.org. And that's our website. And from there, they can access all of our services. We do have a phone number that there that they can call. It's just like a message. You won't reach anybody, but you can leave a message and people will call you back. And you will see all of our upcoming events, how to register for any events. And that's really the best way to contact us. Kaleidoscope is a hard word to spell. So I always think of it as it's Kale, I do scope. Kaleidoscope. Yeah, we tried to just do K-scope and it led people to odd places. So we stuck with kaleidoscopelgbtq.org.
All right. And I will put a link to the website in the show notes. So people can just scroll down to the show notes and click on it, and then you will be there.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Thank you again, Dr. Stephens. I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
I am so grateful to Dr. Stephens for coming on the podcast. If you would like to know more about her, make sure that you check out the show notes. And if you want to know more about the Kaleidoscope program, again, check out the show notes. We have a link to the Kaleidoscope program right there for you. Thank you again for listening. We love to get feedback from you. Feel free to email me at drkiwilson@childnexus.com. And if you have ideas for topics for future conversations, please reach out to me. Let me know. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.